Hi, this is Caroline Hamilton. Nice to meet you all. So we're going to talk today about how to prevent active shooters in our schools. And whole thing sort of got a big kickoff with Columbine. And I think I've had about enough of it. So anyway, we're going to talk about some of these. This is one of the fathers from Uvalde. He's holding the report that we're going to talk about and read the conclusions from in his hand. And there's a picture of his daughter. So here is my background of everything I've been doing for the last 25 years. And I've been really working in, I started in risk and I'm still doing the risk assessment, basically. The whole thing of how you evaluate what's going on. You see what the threat is. You need to make changes. So you make changes, you add in controls that will reduce the threat and increase protection. And then you do it all over again every single year, just like clockwork. And so what you do is you create a whole continuum of security, continuous improvement. That's what we're trying for here. So guns, and this is, I thought, really depressing. Guns are now the #1 leading cause of death among children as of 2020. And worry about having an active shooter is the #1 issue that keeps management and administration up at night, because it's the only thing that's almost impossible to control. I mean, you can adjust your cash flow, you can do more or less marketing, all these things. They can't do anything about the chance of having an active shooter. Well, you can, but most people don't know what it is. In Sandy Hook, I remember exactly when I was there. Twins were tiny. I was in Toys R Us because it was right before Christmas, December 14th. I was listening to I was there with my son, his daughter and son, and he said something weird's going on, in Sandy Hook. I'm getting these things that 3 people had been killed and they think that they're children. And then then a few minutes later, he looked down on his phone. He said, I think that some people I think some people are writing in, and I don't know what they're doing, because they said that now that there are 8 people killed and they think that they're all children. So it ended up at the end of the day, 20 children between 6 and 7 were shot and killed that day. 6 adults were also shot and killed. They waited forever for the first responders, and like in Parkland and like in Uvalde, the kids bled out on the floor in the school by themselves, waiting for somebody to rescue them. Alex Jones, I'm sure you've heard, got a huge, I think $50 million, $43 million fine for saying that Sandy Hook was a lie and that it was just all staged as part of the deep state, which is not true. I've been there, I saw everything, definitely not true. And so the judge said to him, do you know what perjury is? That was last week. So this is an example that I'm going to show you, because it shows you how I was just telling somebody yesterday that I thought that the schools were sort of immune to these super large lawsuits, that they hadn't heard as much about those as we have in some other areas. And then last week, August 3rd, the Texas judge ordered Spectrum Cable and Charter Communications to pay more than $7 billion in damages to family of an 83-year-old grandmother who was brutally stabbed in her home by the cable guy. And one of my friends actually called me on the phone and said, are you sure that's 7 billion? Did you mean 7 million? Is that a typo? No, it's not a typo. So what happened was the cable guy went to this old lady's house wearing his uniform. He saw a lot of money and credit cards sitting around. So he said he couldn't finish it today, had to come back the next day, came back the next day, stabbed her to death, murdered her, stole her credit and all her debit cards, and went on a shopping spree. And the murder, when this happened, was actually 2019, but the verdict in this trial was just announced this week. And in June, a jury found that Charter Communications, that's the parent company of Spectrum, was grossly negligent in the death. And it was a surprise why that was. It was because the guy had lied on his employment records, had all sorts of red flags, had felonies, and nobody checked his application. They just sent him out there and they didn't check anything. And to make matters worse, he even charged the family $58 for the service call where he killed the grandmother. And the jury awarded the family $375 million in damages and said that Charter must pay 90% of those damages. Earlier in the week, another judge announced Charter has to pay an additional $7 billion in punitive damages to the Thomas family He wants them to be an example of what not to do. If your policy is that you do background checks on all new hires, then they either they didn't have the policy in place, which is horrible by itself. But if they did have the policy and they willfully didn't use it, that's what made the award so high. And they said, for the safety of the American public, we can only hope that Charter Spectrum and its shareholders are listening. So this just came out this morning. I just heard it on the news before I got on here. The Uvalde Unified Consolidated School District, I didn't put that all in there, is facing a $27 billion class action lawsuit in conjunction with the May 24th shooting at Robb Elementary that left 19 students and 2 teachers dead. And so a group of attorneys served the school district at a notice of claim Monday night meeting right after the school board meeting. All the attorneys got together and they went and said, here's your notice, you're on notice. And it cites a report from the Texas House of the Legislative House, which we're going to look at, that says Uvalde CISD and its police department failed to implement their active shooter plan, failed to exercise command and control of law enforcement responding to the tragedy. We want this amount of money to compensate these people for this wrong that was parachuted down on them. Bonner, he's one of the attorneys, also said he hopes the large sum can fund mental health resources and hold police forces accountable. And we're going to talk a lot about accountable. The lawsuit will be formally filed in September, naming a long list of defendants. And those are the 356 law enforcement officers, federal, state, local, sheriffs, police, and agents, federal agents. And they're the ones who stood 14 inches from the classroom, just divided from the kids by a door, and heard the gunfire and did not want to go in the classroom. And the commander did not want his guys to get hurt. So he told them to wait outside. So while they were waiting outside, inside the kids were panicking. Even at 6 and 7, they had cell phones to see if where their parents were. They were calling dispatch, they're calling 911 like they'd been told. And nobody was there listening. They were saying, please call the police. Please, all the police were outside their door, but the police ignored it. So it's just a horrible thing. Active shooter incidents in the United States in 2021. This came out in May of this year, and it just shows you how much these things have increased. They're not all school related, but they're all for the U.S. So we had in 2020 we had 40 incidents in 19 states. In 2021 we had 61 incidents in 30 states. In 2020 we had 164 casualties. 38 of those were killed, 126 wounded. And in 2021, we had 243 casualties, 103 killed, 3 times the amount of the other, and 140 wounded. We had only 1 law enforcement killed in 2020, 2 in 2021. We had 11 law enforcement officers wounded in 2020, and only 5 in 2021. 5 of the events in 2020 met the standard for mass killing definition, which is 3 or more people are killed in a populated area. And in 2021, we had 12 who met that mass shooting definition. We had 8 incidents where law enforcement engaged the shooters in 2020. We had 17 in 2021. We had the shooters, 42, 35 were male in 2020. And in 2021, we had 61 shooters and 60 of them were male. Body armor wasn't an issue. 7 of the shooters committed suicide, 11 did not. 11 did, I'm sorry, in 2021. And the interesting thing is I did another survey on it, and I found out that if you're over 60 and you do an active shooter scenario, you kill yourself after. And those are these people here and here. But the younger people don't do that. And that's why you have the trial of the century still going on in Parkland, where the guy Nicholas Gate is still trying to get to save himself from the death penalty and trying to get life in prison for his many sins. So it's just a look at what's going on. Also, school shootings have hit the highest level on record, according to federal data. And this is the research arm of the education department, shows that 93 school shootings during the last school year increasing from just 11 10 years ago. And more school shooting with casualties occurred during the 2021 school year than any other year since they began collecting data on it. And it's a whole new federal report. I'll send you the link that came out about it, about school crime and safety, published by the National Center for Education Statistics. Same thing, 93 school shootings with casualties at public and private elementary and secondary schools during the last school year. And that's from 11 a decade ago. And 43 of the casualties this year of the 93 resulted in the death of the students. Although the rate of non-fatal violent victimization at school for 12 to 18 years old was lower in 2019 than 2009, there were more school shootings with casualties in 2021 than any year since data collection began, increasing from 11 in 2009 to 93 in 2021. And so it just shows you, so why is this still happening? If we've been going through this for 20 years, why is it, and we've spent billions of dollars on school equipment and vests for the police and special weapons and tasers and training and situational awareness and panic alarms and all these other things. Why is this still happening? And why is it still going up? That's the thing to me that's most disturbing. And I think what happens is that security is still an afterthought. And it's not just in schools, it's everywhere. It's in hospitals, it's in manufacturing centers. Nobody thinks much about security. It's just something that they have to take care of, and that's it. So nothing that people pick first to talk about, and security is still an expense item. So that's going to show up on the bottom line, and it's not going to be good. Also, security still follows this very regimented law enforcement model, which really doesn't fit the current situation. In fact, following this law enforcement model, the commander at Uvalde was able to designate it not an active shooter situation like it had been originally portrayed, but changed it into a ballistic incident. And so it lost all the power of the term active shooter. Also, I don't think that people understand, because there's this artificial separation between IT security and other security. They don't realize that all this IT tech is embedded in a lot of these products. And some I'm going to tell you about today, in physical and facility products, security products. So what happened in Uvalde? Here we go again. Here's a guy with his picture and holding the report up. Here's what the report looks like. And it's an interim report, which means that they're still expecting a final report to come out. And here's the link to the report. And I'm going to send you a copy of the slides when we get off the call, probably late today or early tomorrow. And so here's the link to you can also just go to Google and type in Robb Elementary Investigative Committee Report, Texas, and it'll come up with the same thing too. So these are just sort of a look at active shooters by the month. This is not just schools, it's everything. And so it starts off slow, just like everything else in January, February, March, where it's cold. April goes up a little. June, just like it was this year, is the biggest month for active shooters. Then it goes down in July, everybody goes on vacation. August, September, people come back, and then we're into the holidays. This is a summary of that, about how many incidents they had out of this list that we're looking at, how many incidents they had on each of these days, and the day of the week that it was. And you'd think it would be over the weekend and people would break the glass, but they never do. It's always right during the week, during regular business hours. So the most that they had were 12 on a Tuesday, 11 on a Thursday, 14 on a Saturday. Everybody's so happy it's Friday. I guess they don't have any of these. And this shows of the 61 incidents that occurred in 2021, where they occurred. So 6 of them were in Georgia, 5 of them were in Texas. I'm sorry, 6 were in California, right down here. 5 were in Georgia and Texas. 4 were in Colorado and Florida, and then 3 incidents each in Michigan, North Carolina, and Tennessee. So, and 2 in these other states you can see here: Alabama, Arizona, Illinois, Maryland, Nevada, and South Carolina. And it also shows you the increase year over year. So starting at 2017, we had 31, 2018, 30, 2019, 30. And then here's a 30% increase between 2019 and 2020. And then it goes up again, a 52% increase, almost double what it was before, to go from 40 to 61 in 1 year. And so that's a survey. And this is by time of day. So here it shows the breakdown of the numbers, 12 a.m. to 6 in the morning, midnight to 6 in the morning, 11, 6 a.m. to noon, 16, 12 noon to 6 p.m., 23, and 6 p.m. to midnight, 11. So again, it's clustered right in the middle of the day. And so how many school shootings have there been? And so these are they're continuing also. This is for 2020. It hasn't finished yet, but there've already been 27 school shootings this year. There have been 119 school shootings since 2018. The highest number of the shootings, 34, occurred last year. There were 10 shootings in 2020 and 24 each in 2018 and 2019. So how do you go and prevent something like this? So I've got a program that I've put together from analyzing these and watching them over such a long period of time. And I've visited actually almost every single site of a school shooting, including the West Noblesville Middle School in Indiana, where the school couldn't afford to pick up the bullet to take the bullets and clean them out of the wall and redo the wall. So they managed to get new tiles, carpet tiles, to put on the floor so they could take the blood-stained tiles out. But the school resource officer, moved the bookcase for me so I can see that the classroom still has bullets embedded in the wall. And this was just a kid who raised his hand and said, in science class, and said, I need to go to the locker and get my inhaler. I said, go ahead. He went out to the locker and came back in with his gun. And he shot his girlfriend twice. And then the science teacher tried to stop him and charged him, and he shot the science teacher 6 times in the stomach, and his girlfriend died. This is the annual security risk assessment. So that's the first thing that I think schools need to get, have a federal standard for this, instead of having it spread out between so many different districts with different ideas. There have to be some bedrock standards, and having a policy is one, having trainings another, and also having certain controls is another. And it's really required because the district is an employer, and anybody who's an employer, and they're the employer of teachers, they have to comply with the OSHA requirements, the general duty clause that requires every employer to maintain a safe environment for their employees to work free. And the magic word is free of recognized hazards. And so I can think at this point, we can really say that we recognize active shooter and workplace violence. That's a recognized hazard at this point. And so the reason you do the assessment, even though we probably all agree that it needs to be done and that there are recognized hazards, is to identify those. So when you get the money from your budget, you can actually go and buy controls that relate directly to what you need to have. What a concept. So the other thing that I think everybody here should think about, because I was at a conference in Reno and somebody sat down and explained this to me, and I hadn't really thought about it. I was just, I miss security. I'm doing security all the time. I'm looking at new products and figuring out how to use old ones better and all this kind of stuff. And somebody sat down and said to me, all these things that you're looking at, they don't mean anything. They don't save lives, because if you have a panic alarm, is it going to help you save a life just because you have a panic alarm? You can set it off and notify 500 people that you have an issue, but probably it's an active shooter. It's going to be over by the time they get there. That's the problem, is by the time you realize what's going on, it's too late. And that's my problem with a lot of these weapons detection things too, that just tell you there's something going on in the parking lot. Like, it's not going to save a life. So I think the only way to do it is to use an enforced concealed weapons screening program, or call it a solution. And it's just basically 2 posts electrified with a receiving computer that analyzes everybody who walks through. That way you can have 4,000 people walk through in an hour, because you don't have to take anything out of your purse. You don't have to check anything. And it automatically will screen an alarm on any time it finds a certain combination of chemicals. And one of the things that I read, and it goes along with my own experience, was that in Cleveland Clinic up in Ohio, they put in a concealed weapons screening system. And the first month in 3 hospitals up in Northern Ohio, 3 hospitals, they had found 30,000 weapons the first month. And that included guns, it included knives, it included mace in a special compartment, all these things. But you don't find them. In fact, we've gone out to some installations and they set the system up. It starts working, and before, in the first hour, they start finding a gun. And so I think that people are naive if you think that you're checking, even doing like a physical check using a backpack or something. It's just not working. I still have my Parkland clear backpack that I carry places just for awareness. Having an officer in the lobby 7/24, is that really going to stop somebody? Probably not. And probably won't be there all the time anyway, and probably can't afford it either. So having secured doors, that's a biggie. We want to have penalties. So I talk about accountability, propping penalties. You shouldn't be allowed. I was just in another facility in Los Angeles where I went and did one of my 3 a.m. Lighting surveys to make sure the lights weren't all burned out, and 4 or 5 doors on the back side of the facility that were open. They propped them open to get the breeze from outside, when people are working in the late shift, the graveyard shift. And that's just not it, that factored into the Uvalde shooting. The lady had the door open, not locked. People don't want to take the time to walk around from the back to the front of the facility. And that's, you can save a life by walking around to the front of the facility and you won't do it. There's a problem with that too. So what I want to see is all these solutions everywhere, just these 5 are going to make a huge difference. And I want to see penalties for propping open doors, because if we don't have a penalty for it, it could be 3 months off of work without pay. It could be a fine, it could go in your file, or you could get fired, but it's absolutely dead serious. It's such a problem everywhere. One place I was at, they had a rat infestation. Why did they have a rat infestation in a hospital cafeteria? Because they kept propping the doors open at night, because they like the breeze. And the rats, you smell the food that they're preparing in there, and they go like, yeah, let's go. And so their cafeteria was closed for more than a week. I couldn't get a cup of coffee for more than a week because they propped the door open. So please don't do that. These are some of the different, so when this guy sat down and had this talk with me about all these different things that we do to stop active shooters. We have access control for all our doors, which I highly recommend. Areas of refuge for people to hide. They were talking about that on the news this morning. Bollards at the front entry so you can't drive through the facility. That's not exactly required. Camera system, the concealed weapons detection that I'm recommending. Disaster recovery plans. Are they going to prevent an active shooter having a disaster recovery plan? No. They might make it easier to recover from a disaster, but it's not going to prevent it. And so what I want to do is take your brains and mold them around and talk about prevention. What's going to prevent these things from happening? A mass emergency notification system, updating your emergency plan, having emergency policies and procedures. And look at Uvalde. What good does having policies and procedures do if people have the option not to follow them? They're going to be debating, I guess, tonight or tomorrow, whether they're going to fire the guy who let all those kids die, who stood outside the classroom and said, let's not go in because one of our officers might get injured. When the kids are bleeding out 19 kids bleeding out on the floor. How about incident reporting programs? How about intrusion detection systems that automatically tell you? And I just wrote a white paper on here too. And one of the things that I'll send you a copy of it if you'd like to see it. But basically what it's saying is anytime you have a human involved, you can't be, the response is not dependable. So if I run any kind of a weapon or any container or anything like that, I carry a mace, anything, I run it through the chemical detection system by just walking through with I've got my belt on. I have my phone in my hand. I don't have to put anything down. Nothing gets checked. It's not like at the horrible airport. I just walk right through. Nobody has to be there. It's going to go off all by itself. And that's the problem. You have to get rid of the human error in this that says, well, it says he has a gun, but he's my mother, she's my mother-in-law, and I don't want to bother her or make her embarrass the principal or the guy who's taken me on this new job interview, whatever it is. The other thing is that it can't happen here attitude. I knew Uvalde was going to be horrible as soon as I heard that on the news. There's been a school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, and then they interviewed all these people who said, oh, this is the kindest, gentlest place in the world. Everybody loves everybody. We're a real close-knit community. As soon as they say that, I know it's going to be horrible. Not updating policies and procedures. Again, no social media investigations into Ramos, the shooter. No warning after he, on the lawn, shot his grandmother in the face in front of the neighbors, got in her, stole her truck, and yelled out the window that he was going to the school to shoot people. And not one of those people went and picked up in fact, they had their phones with them. They didn't call the police, they didn't call the sheriff, they didn't call the school, they didn't call anybody. They were just stood there shocked. Again, the commander on the scene didn't get notified. He says that 911 calls were still coming in from children in the school who were 14 inches from the entire police force of the whole state of Texas. And they didn't get notified. That the commander didn't get notified. Not allowing first responders in. This is another thing they did in Parkland too. They had the school resource officer with his gun drawn, hiding in a stairwell with a camera on him, or we wouldn't have known that. And then they had that. Then they had 4 deputies in their police cars with their guns drawn. And this was a tower. It's a 3-story tower. And they never went in. The dispatcher told them not to go in because the dispatcher didn't want them to get hurt. So they allowed all the kids to get shot. And then what they did was they thought that the shooter was still up there, even though he wasn't, because there was a glitch in the camera, so they couldn't see the things that the camera was set up to look at. So they decided that he was there and he could have hurt one of the first responders. So they didn't allow him to go in. They sat there in their police car with their gun drawn, and they never went in. And that's what killed half of those kids. And they had, it was 34 people injured and killed, 17 killed, 17 injured. And most of them were children. Again, they had no case management program for disturbed people like the shooter, even though it was public knowledge, and there was no accountability for any of these things. So you can go and cheat on all this stuff. You cannot have the policies and procedures, have them, don't use them. You still get your pension. The guy from the school resource officer in Parkland, which we followed closely, went down the next day to cash in on his 30-year retirement, and he let all those kids die. And I've had a lot of men tell me that they would have gone home and killed themselves if they'd found out that they were responsible, a police officer responsible for 17 deaths of students and 17 injuries, life destroying injuries, and they did nothing. So that's very bad. So a lot of people aren't aware of how things have changed. They don't get the "it can't happen here" idea until it happens to them. They call me on the phone and apologize, and I've had 3 sheriffs do that. Some places think of hospitals, clinics, schools as places, churches as places of refuge. Not anymore. So we have as many church shootings. They're not always publicized, but they're just as bad as the others. Many aren't aware of these new OSHA laws and these new potential fines, and the fact they're passing a federal workplace violence law right now, and that a lot of these things that used to be a choice aren't anymore. They're required. And everybody who I explain this to says, give me a list, the CEO or the COO, president, give me a list of things I'm supposed to do. So, and you get them all done. And that's what it takes. You can't ignore these things. They come back and bite you. So this is from the Uvalde report. So the gunman had an unstable home life. It's a 77-page report, and pages 1 through 70 cover the situation, exactly what happened minute by minute. 71 to 77, this is what I've summarized for you here, of all the things that happened that they felt that had to be changed. Anyway, he was born in Fargo, North Dakota. grew up in Uvalde, Texas, without consistent parental figures, unstable housing conditions, and in poverty. While his life at home was fractured, his life at school was not better. He legally purchased 2 AR-15 style rifles the day before he turned 18. And even though he didn't purchase the actual guns till he was 18, he started buying ammunition and accessories in the months leading up to the shooting. So he wasn't 18 yet. He couldn't buy a gun, but he could buy all the ammo he wanted, all the accessories, laser sights, all those things. And he did buy those. But of course, the gun dealer didn't tell anybody that. And the gun sales, it turns out, I didn't know this either, found out that why wasn't this reported to the Bureau of the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives? And it was not reported to local law enforcement because only handgun purchases are required to be reported to local police. Not if you buy an assault rifle, that's not reported, which is to me insane. The report concluded there was no information actually known to Uvalde law enforcement should have identified this attacker as a threat to any school campus before the shooting came. So again, there was a lack of leadership at the site despite a robust police presence. I'm sorry, I said 346, it was 376. Law enforcement officers arrived at a scene that was chaotic and uncoordinated, the report said. The group of federal, state, and local officials lacked any clear leadership, no basic communication, and no urgency to take the gunman down, according to the committee. Previous official accounts of the shooting placed primary blame on the school district's police chief, Pete Arredondo, who is on administrative leave. He had just been elected, I'm sure you know this, to the city council, and he since resigned from that position. And apparently they're having a hearing. I think they're going to fire him tonight, actually, in Uvalde at the school, another school board meeting. When Arredondo entered the school, he went to classroom 110, which had bullet holes in it, but no children were inside. He then prayed for the kids in room 111 and 112, where the gunman fired more than 100 rounds. But he said under oath, he said he thought those classrooms had been emptied out because the first one he went to didn't have any kids in it. He thought the others were empty too, even though you could hear the sounds of gunfire then. They had not been emptied, and Arredondo proceeded to handle the incident as of a barricaded subject and not an active shooter, according to the report. With the benefit of hindsight, we know this was a terrible, tragic mistake. Officers said they knew the gunman was in one of the rooms, but they didn't know what was happening behind the closed door because they didn't hear screams or cries, despite hearing gunshots ringing out. Relaxed school security allowed the gunman to attack quickly. They had safeguards and active shooter procedures in place, but the staff had developed a culture of complacency around those things. Out of convenience, some teachers frequently left doors unlocked or propped open, a violation of school policy. And due to a shortage of keys, which have probably cost less than $50 to fix, substitute teachers were told not to lock the doors, to just not to have the locks working. School was also set up with an intruder alert system, but the frequency of bailout alerts, which we call false positives, which flagged the presence of a fleeing human trafficker in the area, it had desensitized teachers to their urgency. So because no bailout event had ever been resulted in a violent incident, so they just ignored the alert system. On the day of the attack, the gunman scaled a 5-foot exterior fence before multiple unlocked doors allowed the gunman to enter the school classrooms unimpeded. That had school personnel lock the doors as the school policy required. So you see my skepticism about school policies. It could have slowed his progress for a few precious minutes, long enough to receive alert, hide children and lock doors, long enough to give police more opportunities to stop the attacker. Instead, the gunman killed most of his victims before any responder even opened the door. So this is not going to work, right? So we need to have put in every school should have the access control concealed weapons screening. It's the most important thing you can do to save these kids' lives. And they say now kids don't want to go to school in Uvalde anymore. They're afraid because their brothers and sisters then went on a normal day and got shot, never came back. So these are very affordable systems. They're cheaper than almost anything else you can buy. And it's going to keep the concealed weapons out of your school. Over 50% of hospitals and schools do no screening at all. And 80 to 90% of large businesses, manufacturing facilities also do no screening at all. That's why we keep having problems in these same places. But again, if you can show management the return on investment, on weapons screening, and that's done by showing them how much they're going to lose if something happens. And it also cuts down on the requirement for security officers to be there, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. It's going to take care of that for you. So again, this whole methodology is based on the Defense Department. When I came there in 1990 and started right away on a project for the Defense Department and the FBI, I rewrote their requirements for school safety with the National Institute of Justice. And again, the whole methodology has been standardized, customized for high value critical assets. And I can't think of a more critical asset or a high value asset than somebody's child. So it's currently required by all the federal agencies, all the state agencies, all levels of government, all have to do these assessments. OSHA calls them a worksite assessment. So once you define the return on investment, saying if you spend $1 on this, it's going to save you $500. So it just shows you how high the return on investment is, because the cost of the problem is exasperated by the wrongful death lawsuits. That's what's caused this prices to skyrocket for these things. So how much does it cost? Initial cost of the control, $1,000. One facility set up, maintenance costs, value of the asset that's protected, all those children, all those teachers, all those staff members, the physical facility. So just to get an idea of what that is, in Parkland, they had put up this big 3-story tower of classrooms. It's been sitting there since the day Parkland happened, which was February 14th, 2018. And it's still sitting there with the blood still on the floor, the bloody backpacks open on the floor. They've never opened the doors after they decided to tear it down. Took them 3 years to get the money to tear it down. So supposedly in 2022, they're finally going to tear that tower down. It just sits there loaded with the blood of all these kids. So how do we calculate the return on investment? We look at the cost of the control, like how much does it cost to put up a weapons detection system based on the loss that would be suffered if it was the asset was damaged or destroyed, like a $7 billion lawsuit. And then we add that, take that formula and apply it to the purchase of one of these concealed weapons detection systems. So for the risk assessment that we do ahead, just so we know how many we need and things like, and how, like, if we need them at all. Security and safety risk assessment on every facility every year has to incorporate the most current threat data, or it's no good. And we look at the threat data, we look at the value of the criticality of those assets. We survey the staff to find out what their compliance, because that's going to make a difference. When you have people who aren't complying with the policies when they're getting sued for wrongful death, it's going to come out to ask them, were you aware that this was a policy? And we have the paperwork to say, no, they didn't know, because this is a question they answered. They said that they didn't have that. They didn't know that you had a workplace violence policy. They didn't know that there was a room to go to if there was an active shooter. All the things that they didn't know that they say after it happened, but they actually should have known. Again, looking at all the potential controls and rating how much you get out of them if it was actually able to save lives. That's the bottom line here. It's got to be able to save a life. And then we prepare action reports for the next year and have the board sign off on it. And they will often ask me when I'm going out doing these things, let me see the board sign off. And so I have to go to the big book, big 3-ring binder that has a copy of all the board meetings, and find where in the minutes it said that the board approved a concealed weapon detection system, or the board approved panic alarms, whatever it is. That's how we have to get there through that. Then we update the emergency plan, the policies and procedures based on the results of the risk assessment. So if we're in Texas and in Dallas, it rained, like 24 inches in 24 hours, then we have to plan for that next year. Rapid sea level rise, increase in local crime, increase in search, and other things too. And then, of course, to have the best mass notification system, to be able to warn other agencies or even call for help. And we found out 2 years ago that lack of security is not a legal argument. The federal judge went off and said that didn't matter, all this other stuff, that if you say you're a security officer, you actually have to perform security. So McDonald's was sued and won in College Station, Texas, $27 million lawsuit after 2 kids died in a fight in the parking lot. Those went on all the time. And when they finally looked to see how many times local police had been called to that McDonald's parking lot, they had been called over 100 times. And they still didn't take the recommendations of getting a security officer out there and also having a decent lighting. U.S. Security Associates, this was a termination. A lot of these active shooters are really terminations in hiding. And this one was a lady who got fired, and she immediately walked out to the parking lot and got her Glock out of her glove compartment, came back in. The security guys saw her coming back in, and they locked themselves in the cast iron boiler room. And so they sued Kraft and won a $64 million settlement. Stanford Health sued for $82 million after a lady got out of her cardiac rehab unit and accident, just got in her Mercedes, stepped on the gas instead of the brake, went sailing through 61 feet into the facility before she hit a double concrete block wall, and she got out. She was fine. But the family sued for wrongful death of this incredibly talented person, director of Lawrence Livermore Labs. And another hospital one, we had the Delnor Hospital outside of Chicago, where four nurses received almost $8 million. They were traumatized and raped by the patient after the officer from the county who escorted them to the hospital let the guy out of the handcuffs. And so they actually included Clark County in the lawsuit. So here, just a little summary of some of the incidents. The 4th of July parade, I think 49 people injured and like 10 shot. The oldest active shooter, 61-year-old guy, shot up the church, killed 2 people and shot another one who died later. So it was actually Tulsa hospital shooting. Guy had a back operation. They said he wasn't going to get the drugs he wanted. So he went back and got an assault rifle at a gun shop, came back and killed the doctor, killed the other doctor who was in that complex, and almost fatally shot 2 other people, the receptionist and a bystander. The Uvalde school massacre, the Top supermarket in Buffalo, the Geneva church shooting where the guy hated Taiwanese, he was Chinese. He hated them so much he brought Gorilla Glue and he glued the church doors shut. He brought a loaded nail gun and he nailed the other doors shut, and he put a big chain around them so nobody could get in there. And of course, the Oxford High School shooting that's still being adjudicated. So these are just some of the things. You can also sign up. You can just write me a note and I'll sign you up for these risk alerts that I send out twice a week, and they don't cost anything right now. So we look at this is the 4th of July parade, 7 shot and killed, 47 shot and injured. How did he get in to do that up on the roof? He used a back door that was propped open. That's how he got in. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Here's a 71-year-old active shooter at a church, another church. A couple saw the guy sitting alone, wanted to make him feel welcome. So after he ate, he shot them first. The Geneva church shooting, the Tulsa shooting that I just described to you, the Encino church shooting where the guy brought his dog, left his car in the middle of the street, ran into the emergency room and told them he wanted some meds. They didn't give them to him, so he stabbed 2 nurses and a doctor. And then the SWAT team came in and he held them at bay for 4 hours, trying to negotiate with them. And he was killed at the end of the standoff. This is again, this is another preventable accident when the nurse at Kaiser Permanente's Santa Clara Medical Center died by suicide. He brought his gun to work. They had no screening, so he was able to walk right through the security with it. And then he worked halfway through his shift and then shot himself in the emergency department, killed himself in front of another hospital staff member and the patients who were waiting there. It's another one shot, WeatherTech warehouse facility. 27-year-old guy was hired temporarily and was let go. Charged with shooting 3, 1 fatally at a suburban when he had like houses on the other side of the system. And again, talked about the legal considerations. This is the OSHA general duty clause, requires every employer furnish to each of its employees a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. So this can shut down your school district. Also has monetary fines attached to it. And so the only way to keep active shooters out of your facility entryway, and this is this program that's the world's best concealed weapons solution. And it's best because it's created by TICS in Silicon Valley. And so it can detect all these different things just based on their composition. How to prevent active shooters. E is for enforced entry concealed weapon screening, the most current policies and procedures, securing those doors. Windows, we don't seem to have a problem with, but the doors are really a problem. And having your actual annual security risk assessments done. And so what could have prevented any of these things? The hospital murders, they walked right in. The suicide at the ER in Philadelphia, they walked right in. Uvalde shootings, they didn't even walk in. The police never got there. Parkland massacre, same thing. Police never went in. Noblesville West shooting, same thing. Police just went in when they actually had to. They never got, they went after the situation was over and after the people had been shot. So everybody's got to enter the facility, whatever it is, a school, whatever, through a specific entryway. And then you walk through the weapons detection system. So that's the most thing that's going to make a difference. I just want to show you the picture here of, because we're running a little close on time, but basically here's how it works. So just 2 posts set up freestanding. And here's a computer screen there, can be iPad size on a stand like that. And you walk through and 3,000 to 4,000 people can go through in an hour. And it's automatically going to note to alarm if anything happens. It can also lock the room where the systems is, lock it down automatically in 1 second. Can also lock turnstiles if you have turnstiles that you're using. And we've had it tested and it detects more concealed weapons than any other type of screening system. And again, that's what we want to do, is we want to look at these controls, see what they have in them, and be able to show by return on investment how much this control is going to save the school district, the private school, whatever. But you have to have these controls in place. You have to reduce liability and prevent these school shootings before they happen. So you need to talk to your management. You need to get in touch, find out how much, what it takes to get this stuff, talk to management about what you need to secure the facility. Because again, lack of security is not considered a legal argument in case of an active shooter. And then you analyze your existing access control system and add the concealed weapons detection screening system. Active shooter is risk assessment. You can have one of those 2 performing integrated security risk assessments. And this is part of the return on investment. So get the best bang for the buck. And you can feel, if you have any questions about this or want to see any of the documents that these came from, including the report, you can just write me at caroline@riskandsecuritylllc.com. And I stay up all the time, and all I do is work on this. I'm just passionate about it. I care about it. It's so close to me. I see this high school every single day where all this happened. And that's nothing like that to keep your eyes on what you're supposed to be doing every day. Here's my email address. This is Michael Green. He's the CEO of Athena Security. And this is his email address too, in case you'd like to talk to him about some of the technical aspects of this. And so I want to thank you very much for coming. I really, really appreciate it.